On this week's Want to Know Wednesday, we're talking a little bit about goal setting and how you can back in and reverse engineer your goals, something that I've done for a long time. And basically, you got to be able to set that ultimate goal where you want to be, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to kind of talk through it, and I'm going to use my actual, some of my actual goals, for example, and kind of how we've walked back into them. Because what this does is it's so easy to pick a big, huge goal and then just freeze because you've got Z, which is, if where we're starting today is A of the alphabet, and if the destination is Z, which I talk about this quite a bit, you've got to be able to know all those steps in between to be able to take the next step, right? You don't need to know all the steps in between, but what this does, what I'm about to go through, is it's going to take you from Z, and we're going to work backwards, and then what happens is you're going to be able to start from today and get to B, and get to C, and get to D, because you're going to have a better picture in your head of what you need to do based on the reverse engineering and working backwards from your goal. So what I started doing about 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, was I would take the big goal that I had and I'd break it down backwards. So for example, the goal that I had for 2025, and I started this again, it was around December, middle of 2020, right? So by the end of 2025, I said, hey, we're going to go out and we're going to get 20,000 apartment units by the end of 2025. Now, is this going to actually happen or not? Hey, I don't know. We're going to swing for the fences. We're going to see what happens. But I used to even get to the point where, I would even sit there and think about that and be like, man, that seems daunting. That seems crazy. That seems, whatever. But then I'm like, okay, well, what do we have to do to get to 20,000 apartment units by December 2025? That means we got to get to 19,999 apartments. That means we're going to get to 19,000 apartments before we get to 20. That means we need to get to 15,000 apartments before we get to, the 16,000. It means we need to get to 8,000 before we get to 10,000. It means we need to go get our next 200. That would then put us on pace, right, to start doing it. So the first thing that I kind of did was I kind of paced it out. I said, okay, per quarter, right? If we have, back then it was 5 years until the end of 2025. So basically there's 4 quarters in a year. Multiply that by 5, 20 quarters, right? So basically I would say, hey, this would have to be the quarterly progress that we would have to have from today through 2025, right? And so what I did was basically I took, okay, here's the amount of units that we have now. Here's the amount of units that we need to pick up in this quarter. Here's how many we would have to pick up the next quarter, the next quarter, the next quarter, right? And each quarter would kind of grow a little bit more. Like, I didn't front load it where we had, I didn't divide the actual unit count. Like, let's say we needed 20,000 units, and we got 20 quarters. I didn't do 1,000 units a quarter starting in quarter one, right? Because what I know with growth is as we grow, we're going to be able to pick off more and more, right? So basically, for an example, Q4 2022, I've got us acquiring 350 units. So if I go, but then I go to the first quarter of 2025, I've got us acquiring 2,000 units in that quarter, right? And so you don't need to just simply divide. It's more of when you do these planning sessions, which again, the planning session should only be like 1 or 2 times a quarter. You don't spend a ton of time doing this planning, but you need to be able to do it quarterly to readjust yourself and refocus yourself, right? And to see the progress that you've made because your head has been down working the other 88 days of the quarter. So you need 1 to 2 planning days per quarter. That's it. That's all I do with this planning sheet that I have. I look at it 2 times a quarter. All right. So what I did was, okay, so for example, here's the trajectory that I have from Q1 2022 through Q4 2025. I've got us acquiring 48 units in 2022, Q1 2022, the next quarter 300, the next quarter 350, the next quarter 350, the next quarter 700, then 750, 750, 818, 1000, 1250, 1750, 2000, 2000, 2500, and 2750 in that final quarter to put us at the 20,000 units by the end of 2025. Now, that was obviously only 3 years because I've kind of I adjust this model as we go, right? So this model changes with me, and I'm basically just working from 2022. So you didn't hear, what I had from 2020 through 2022, but that gives you an idea, right? It gives you an idea of how I set that pace. Now, the next step is when I think about that, right? Because now I did how much I'm going to be doing, and you can do this for whatever your goal is. It doesn't matter. You need to be able to just work the numbers. It all comes down to numbers, and then work it backwards. So now now it's like, okay, well, what do I need to be able to in Q2 of 2022 close on 300 units? Ballpark, what's our purchase price per unit, right? Well, I threw a ballpark number at it. It doesn't matter what the number is, right? But I threw a ballpark number at it. That gave us a total acquisition price. Okay, so here the total acquisition price, $51 million. That means I'm gonna have to raise ballpark. I know that right now in this climate, I'm having to put down about 30%. That means we're gonna have to raise about $15,300,000 from investors, right? And now what I start to get to be able to do is we have about 200 investors. I know on average how much our investors invest. I know how much the family offices that invest with us invest each deal, and then the other individuals, I know how much they invest with us each deal. So now with those averages, I know how many family offices or individuals and what check size they have to write in. So then I know we need 70 investors, we need 100 investors, we need 20 investors to get that equity amount that's then going to get that, be able to get that volume of purchases to get us that unit count in that quarter, right? And so now I'm starting to work with numbers, because now what I also know is I also know just from doing this, and you're going to learn as you start to do it, right? Your plan is never going to be perfect, right? But once you kind of have a starting point of a plan, you're going to start to figure out some ratios. And with us, I know about how many people I have to share with, and I know how many will then invest in that deal, right? So for example, if your ratio is you got to share this with 100 people to get 3 people on board, and you need 20 investors, you better be able to do the math and say, okay, well, to get 20, I'm going to have to talk to 600 people, right? Everyone's ratios are a little bit different. The better you are, the better your ratios are going to be, right? But you know how many people you're going to have to share the investment with, share the idea with, all right? So now I've got it all the way back down to operations, right? And so with operations, I know about how many managers, how many leasing specialists, how many service techs we have on site at the properties per unit, right? So in 2025, I've got it projected when we're at 20,000 units that we've got like 500 employees. Now, how right is that? I don't know how right that is, right? But in Q4 of 2023, I've got it projected that we have 136 employees. Q1 2023, I've got 78 employees. That's what I've got on here. This is what my tracker is telling me that I've got. And again, as you grow, you need more structure, right? And so I'm kind of just like oddballing it, I pick up things that I read in the industry and whatnot, and I pick up ideas and I just start throwing down things, right? So now I go to, okay, well, how much are each of those people getting paid, right? Well, I know what we're paying. I know what we're paying the people we have now. You know, we add some more property managers, we add some service techs, you multiply the number. You know, obviously the salaries now are probably different than 4 years from now, because people are going to get raises, or that job is going to require, you know, more of a payment. So what are you going to pick? 3%, 5%, 10% per year as wage growth, right? But I've got that all calculated in. Well, the other thing, we self-manage, okay? So part of our management fees basically go towards better technology so that we can leverage that. It goes towards more people and the next position that helps us to get to where we want. And so it's important that I have an idea how much these properties, the units that I have, produce in rent, because I know what we're going to charge as a management fee. So basically I've got our average rent, which this is going to be way outdated, I think, by the time we hit 2025, because when I first started this, you know, things were a little bit different. So it's probably time, the next time that I sit down and do this, which is going to be towards the end of this quarter, I'm going to probably readjust the average rents across our portfolio, because right now I've got average rent of $1,420 out in 2025. Something's telling me that that's probably already a little bit behind, right? So then I have a projected occupancy, all right? Then I have projected NOI, I have projected cap rates, I have projected payrolls per quarter, but I take that total revenue at the property level, I multiply it by, you know, 0.03 to 0.05, which is 3 to 5% of a management fee. Then I know how much management fees Spaulding Group is going to be getting, so then I know what type of technology we can go invest in. I know what our next or middle management role is going to be at X number of units. That makes sense? So if I, for example, can then come up with, okay, we're going to have about 232 employees in Q3 2024, right? Now, the thing with my business is that the managers, the leasing specialists, the service techs, they're working on site. They're not coming to the corporate office all the time, right? But basically, I'm able to figure out, okay, which employees need a spot at the corporate offices, which ones don't, you know, what we're going to need for group trainings, how many people will be in those group trainings, et cetera, et cetera. And that then also gives me how much, an approximate square footage of what I'm going to need for an office space, right? So I'm also going to be able to put that into my budget of, okay, $200,000 on rent, whatever it might be, $100,000 on rent, right? But I'm coming up with an office, what we need for an office, how many rooms we need, how many square footages for more of like open area cubicle type spaces. So this is all a part of the plan to get there. Now, what's really actually surprised me is as I've started doing this 2 years ago, how pretty close to the plan I've been. Now, some quarters we will be well under the units that I had mentioned, but some quarters will be way ahead, which overall kind of puts us on pace. So as of right now, on this, I've got Q4 of 2022, so at the end of this year, December 31st, 2022, I've got our total unit count at 1,982. The crazy thing about that is August, so 16 days from right now when I'm recording this, August 17th, we're closing on another 460 units. It's going to take us to about just shy of 1,900 units, right? So basically, if we don't close on anything else the rest of the year, that would mean I'm about 82 units off pace of a pace that I set 2 years ago. So that's the power that this thing has of being able to keep me on track and have an ultimate goal that's way out there, but then be able to back in it and back in it by quarter, right? And again, I spend freaking 2 days a week, 2 days a quarter going on this plan, because when you spend too much time on here, you're just going to get lost and thinking about, I try not to think about too much of the detail. I try not to get lost in like how it's going to work out, right? We get into details, but I don't sit there and be like, oh, how? Like, I just kind of come up with the data. For example, this is just a data point. The equity I'm going to have to raise in the first quarter of 2024, it's showing $60 million. Right now, that's about 2 years from now, right? Right now, I have no idea how we're going to go out and raise that. But what I do know is if I just keep taking the steps that get me to that point, and if I keep having success this quarter and next quarter, if I keep having success today, this week, next week, this month, next month, that's going to give me success this quarter. And if I keep doing that quarterly, I'm going to be in a position where I'll have the contacts to raise $60 million in a quarter. By the time we get out to 2025 Q1, I'm raising $135 million that quarter, right? By the time we get out to that point, if I work this plan and if I'm successful with what we've already done in the last 10 years and turning those properties, selling them, refinancing them, whatever, and then reinvesting that money back in, if I'm really good at performing for investors so that they continue to give us leads, if I'm really good at growing a portfolio to 5,000, 7,000, 10,000 units, I'm going to naturally start to get, and I'm going to keep telling my story through, social media and whatnot. I'm going to keep getting the eyeballs that I need to people who can write bigger and bigger checks. I'm going to get the eyeballs I need to be able to get me another 1,000 people that can write $50,000 to $1 million check. So that over the whole span of this, I can raise $1.25 billion by Q4 of 2025 so that we can have 20,000 apartments that are cranking out, annual revenues of $232 million. So it doesn't matter what your goal is. It doesn't matter if you're in real estate. It doesn't matter if you're in any type of sales. It doesn't matter what goal it is. You can back in. It can be athletics. It can be whatever you want to. It can be a 100-yard dash time. It can be how much you want to bench press. It can be how much you want to weigh, whether you want to gain weight, lose weight. It can be whatever you want it to be. But do you notice how I'm not expecting myself to go and do this just overnight. This is going to be a body of work. This is going to take time. This is numerous quarters, numerous months, numerous days, hours spent actually in the grind doing what the plan is. But when you work this thing all the way backwards, it ultimately is going to tell you what you need to do every single day. What do you think? Leave your thoughts. Hope this makes sense. This is something that has really, really helped me in a lot of different ways, not just business, but a lot of different ways. And it can help you too. Spend 2 days a quarter on it, work backwards, grind like hell during that quarter, during that month, during that week, during that day, and you're going to automatically look up and you're going to be like, holy crap, look at the ground we gained on getting to that objective or getting to that goal. Thank you guys.